You know that feeling, right? Like you're your own worst enemy. Like there's some hidden operating system running in the background, just derailing your best intentions. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that very system. We're going to explore what's called the invisible architecture of your mind.
So let's start with a big one, because I think we've all been here. You have that aha moment, right? A huge breakthrough, a profound realization. You finally know what you need to do differently. And yet, crickets. Nothing actually changes. So the question is, why? Why does that brilliant insight so often just fizzle out?
Well, this is what we're calling the behavior mystery. It's that super frustrating gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it. And it's the exact spot where so many of our best efforts just seem to completely fall apart.
I mean, does any of this sound familiar to you? You try harder at something, but somehow things just get worse. Or how about this? You're under a big deadline, and suddenly, your brain just turns to mush. You can't think straight. Or you find yourself sliding right back into that same old pattern, the one you swore you were done with. Listen, these aren't personal failings. Not at all. They're actually clues, pointing to a much deeper system that's at play.
Okay, so if our good intentions aren't really the ones in charge, then what is? Well, the answer lies in this concept called structural cognition. The idea here is that there's a governing architecture, a hidden layer that's actually running the show behind the scenes.
And when we say architecture, I want to be really clear, we are not being metaphorical. We're talking about the actual, functional operating system of your mind. Think of it as the set of rules and constraints that dictates what your mind can and cannot do. It's kind of like the physical architecture of a building, right? It determines where you can walk and where you're just going to run straight into a wall.
Now, this next part is absolutely crucial. Your cognitive architecture, it's not your personality, it's not your beliefs, it's not your emotions. The best way to think about it is like a riverbed. The water flowing through it, that's the content, your thoughts, your feelings. It's always changing, always moving. But the architecture, that's the shape of the riverbed itself. It's the structure that determines where all that water can and cannot flow. And it's always there, always operating in the background.
This really gets to the heart of the whole thing. You know that feeling of being stuck in a mental loop? Or that sudden, amazing rush of clarity that comes out of nowhere? Or even just the way your thoughts get all fuzzy when you're under pressure? None of that is random. That's you literally feeling the shape and the constraints of your own cognitive architecture from the inside.
All right, so if we want to understand this blueprint of the mind, we got to ask, what's it actually made of? So let's break this whole architecture down into its 5 core fundamental components. Okay, here are the big 5: topology, load, coherence, stabilisation, and thresholds. Now, these might sound a little technical, but trust me, these are the functional properties that when they come together, create your entire experience of reality. So let's unpack them one by one. First up is topology. The easiest way to think about this is like the unique map of your mind. It's the specific layout of all the mental pathways that exist just for you. Some of those paths are like wide, easy to travel superhighways, but others, they might be narrow, totally blocked off, or maybe they just don't even exist yet.
So, have you ever wondered why certain thoughts just seem to loop over and over again? Well, that's topology in action. That one worry you keep coming back to, that's just a really well-worn path on your mental map. And the reason you can't just decide to think a different thought is because the other path, well, it isn't as developed, or maybe it's not even accessible from where you are right now. This is huge. It's a structural issue, not a willpower issue. All right, next up is load. And this is pretty much what it sounds like. It's the total demand being placed on your system at any given moment. But it's not just your to-do list, right? It's the mental weight of uncertainty. It's social pressure. It's trying to make complex decisions. And the key thing to remember is that the very same architecture will behave completely differently under low load than it does under high load. Okay, which brings us to coherence. This is basically the integrity of your whole system. It's how well it holds its shape when it's under load. The suspension bridge analogy is perfect here. When coherence is high, the bridge is flexible, right? It can bounce back from the stress of all that traffic. But when the load gets too high and coherence is strained, that's when the whole system gets rigid and brittle. It becomes unable to adapt.
So what happens when that bridge really starts to wobble? You know, when load threatens to completely overwhelm coherence. Well, the system has a defense mechanism, stabilisation. It automatically activates these default, predictable patterns just to reduce complexity. And this is so key. Your most stubborn, frustrating habits, they often stick around because they are, in fact, incredibly effective ways your architecture has learned to stabilize itself when it's under pressure. And finally, we have thresholds. This one explains why big changes in our lives so often feel sudden, like they came out of nowhere. See, your architecture doesn't really change bit by bit. It holds its structure, and it holds, and it holds, until the load becomes so great that its old ways of stabilizing just completely fail. And when that threshold is crossed, bam, the entire system can rapidly reorganize into a totally new shape. This is the structural reality behind what we call a breakthrough.
Okay, so we've got the 5 core components. Now let's put them all together and see how they actually create the reality that we all live through day in and day out.
Let's walk through a super common example. Imagine your load goes way up. You've got a tight deadline at work. Okay, step 1. Step 2, your coherence is threatened. You start to feel scattered, stressed out. Then, instantly, step 3, your stabilization mechanisms kick in. And step 4, your behavior narrows. You might suddenly find yourself procrastinating on social media, or maybe you get really irritable with your family, or you decide now is the perfect time to deep clean your desk. And here's the crucial insight. That behavior, it isn't the problem. It is the solution your architecture is using to try and stabilize itself.
And this is why two people can go through the exact same event and come out with wildly different realities. It's not just about their mindset or their attitude. It's because their unique architectures, with their different maps, their different levels of coherence, are processing the load of that event in fundamentally different ways.
So let's circle all the way back to those mysteries we started with. Why does pressure distort our thinking? Well, now we know. High load strains coherence. Why does that brilliant insight fail to create lasting change? Because insight is just content, but our actual behavior is constrained by our topology. See? These aren't just weird personal quirks. They are the predictable results of a system that is just operating according to its own structure.
So, what's the big takeaway here? I mean, what's the point of seeing all of this? Well, it leads to a really fundamental shift in how we can approach change, moving away from that brute force control method and instead moving towards simple, powerful clarity.
Just look at this comparison. On one side, you have all the typical things we try, right? More motivation, more discipline, more willpower. Those are all attempts to change the content. But on the other side, you have the structural approach. And instead of fighting your own system, you just map it. You seek to understand its constraints. You clarify its limits. And what's the result? You drastically reduce that exhausting internal conflict that comes from trying to force your mind to do something its current structure simply can't support.
And that is the huge paradigm shift. You cannot just will your architecture to be different. I mean, trying to do that is like yelling at a blueprint and expecting the house to change. It's just not going to happen. The real work, and honestly, the real freedom, comes from simply seeing the structure for what it is, without all the judgment.
And look, this is the ultimate promise here. Seeing the architecture doesn't mean you magically fix everything overnight. What it does is something way more profound. It changes the game itself. It starts to reveal new possibilities for action, things that were literally invisible to you before. And at the same time, it brings this incredible sense of compassion for why certain other paths were just always out of reach.
So, we're going to end by turning this back to you. Now that you have this new lens, this new way of seeing the invisible architecture that's been governing your experience this whole time, what becomes possible? What old mysteries about yourself suddenly start to make a whole lot more sense?